Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to my little series reviewing the book Transformative Nursing in the NICU, Trauma-Informed Age-Appropriate Care, the second edition. I'm the author of this book. My name is Mary Coughlin. I'm a neonatal nurse practitioner by training and the president and founder of Caring Essentials Collaborative, an organization that is committed to transforming the heart and soul of healthcare around the globe through the adoption of a trauma-informed paradigm. So I left you guys off in chapter 4, where we're focusing on the science that underpins the relevance of a trauma-informed approach. And in my previous lecture, I talked about the neuroendocrine immune network. And today, in that same chapter, I'm going to talk about the subheading of epigenetics and early life adversity. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit of what I've got in the book, but I've also, again, research is just always, being brought forth, and it's just so wicked exciting to see more and more brilliant minds investigating the implications of these epigenetic modifications and how they're linked to various pathologies and, of course, longer term health disruptions and health challenges and that sort of thing. So let me just start with the book. And my first exposure to epigenetics, I had seen a couple of articles, early on, written in Advances in Neonatal Care, where my nursing colleagues were talking about the epigenetics and of some of the disease processes and the vulnerability of the epigenome to the NICU environment. But my first in-your-face exposure with it was when I read this really cool paper written by Rosario Monterroso and Livio Provenzi. These are two brilliant, I was just thinking, did I pronounce his name correctly? These are two brilliant researchers, part of this larger brilliant research team out in Northern Italy that have been investigating this idea of preterm behavioral epigenetics. And I think the first paper I came across was maybe 2017, and don't quote me on that, but where they talked about, they actually coined this term epigenetics, where they were kind of wondering and postulating what are the ethical implications of the care that we provide in the NICU if we now are understanding that we're changing these individuals at that epigenetic level. Brilliant information that we need to have at the front line, those, bedside clinicians and providers that are making these decisions and understanding how care is managed to recognize that we are indeed impacting their epigenome. And so understanding that then gives us the opportunity to examine how are we providing care and how can we mitigate that environmental stressor that is precipitating this modification of the epigenome. Because that's really what we're finding, is that the epigenome of these developing individuals is very modifiable. It's very susceptible to environmental stressors. And the Provenzi team, or Monterrosi team, they are looking at this idea of prematurity as an early life adverse experience. So the stress that they endure is the toxic stress, right? So again, it's not that all stress is bad. And I've said this before, stress is an important part of our evolution and our adaptation to the world and new experiences, novel exposures that help us overcome, right, and adapt to and build resilience and strength and, get smarter and creative and problem solving, all that kind of good stuff. So it's not all stress, but it's that toxic stress. It's that relenting stress. It's that traumatic stress that is perceived by the individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening and overwhelms their ability to cope. That's the stress that we're talking about. And it's kind of a new idea because I think, at least from my clinical experience, we just bundle it all together as stress and not really understanding that there are gradations of this idea and that we need to be able to navigate and discern what is this stressful experience. Recognizing that experiences are stressful for these individuals and then offering appropriate comfort, solace, support, love during these stressful experiences can actually then cultivate resilience in the individual and ideally mitigate a lot of these short-term and long-term consequences, including epigenetic modifications through a process. The most commonly studied process is this phenomenon of DNA methylation. And so epigenetics, I just kind of start out with a definition. It is the science of the chemical modifications to gene expression without altering the genetic code or the DNA. That the epigenome is really the interface between the DNA and the environment. And that environment includes not just the physical environment, but it's experiences that individuals move through. It's a dynamic kind of an interplay that influences how the epigenome responds, much like how we talked about neural networks in the NEI network, the neuroendocrine immune network, and how the brain is expecting certain experiences. And when those experiences don't manifest, it kind of shifts gears and goes to this experience-dependent adaptive process. Again, because the core goal of the organism in these extreme situations is to survive. And so the organism will do whatever it is. The individual will do whatever it has to do physiologically to survive the situation. And so it's quite possible that these epigenetic modifications are designed to support survival. And I'm just hypothesizing that. I've not read any papers that have really helped us understand the why, but that it does happen. And it does happen in the setting of stress. And so Monterossi and Provenzi, it was a 2015 paper. I apologize, I said 2017. Sweat and Tammings published a paper in 2016, again, talking about this vulnerability of premature infants to DNA methylation of the epigenome. So, and I like, there was an exemplar that really helped me get a grip on it, where think of the genes, right, your DNA, as the hardware of the computer, and that the epigenome is the software. So epigenetic mechanisms control how the genes are expressed. And some, you might have heard some of this language, right? Turning off, turning on different genes, right? And that's what happens when the epigenome experiences methylation phenomenon, that certain genes are expressed and others are not expressed. There's other types of epigenetic mechanisms. There's, let's see, there's histone tail modification, there's non-coding RNA molecules, and then there's DNA methylation, and there may be more, but these were just kind of the main vehicles that I uncovered as I was curating the research for this paper. So DNA methylation is the most studied, and the mechanism involves the transfer of a methyl group at the specific CPG sites. And these are the cytosine phosphate guanine sites. That's the most commonly observed group that is impacted by this methylation. And again, I'm just, sharing this nerdy information that I hope you find it exciting. I hope you find it intriguing, and I hope you find it interesting enough that you're encouraged, that you're motivated and inspired to do some more research. Okay, I'm not saying take this on face value just because Mary Kaufman's reading a book that she wrote, but verify it, check it out, because literally the papers that I'm going to share with you shortly, they're hot off the press. Like I think they range from, there was a 2021 that talks about NEC. There's a 2020, I think, and that sort of thing. So you'll find that there's lots of brilliant researchers and nurse researchers within neonatology that are looking at this. So it's really an exciting time, I think, to be in neonatology, and an exciting opportunity for us to be encouraged to check this stuff out and then evaluate and discuss with our colleagues. Okay, this is hot off the press. This is new research. We can't be waiting 17 years to operationalize this new information. We need to act on it now, because literally lives are at stake, and we can be that turnkey. We can change the developmental trajectory of these individuals. If you're really getting super nerdy about it, you can look at some of these graphs in the book and in the papers that I've gotten permission to republish these graphs in here. NICU-related stress is consistently connected to these epigenetic modifications. And there are several different genes that have been identified. I've not represented a lot of them. I've only really focused on one in particular, or maybe there's two. No, just one. Nope, there is two. But there's actually now in the neck paper that I'm going to share with you a variety of additional genes that have, yeah, I'm trying to look for the right word, that have also succumbed to methylation and that are linked to necrotizing enterocolitis. And again, these researchers also feel that the trigger for the methylation is again associated with environmental stress, which covers the gamut. And I'll talk to you about that in a second. So back to my Italian research team that I'm just so madly in love with and so impressed with. They did actually one of their studies after they identified this marker, this SLC6A4 serotonin transporter gene. This is what they discovered, that it was it was exposed to DNA methylation, and it actually impacted the activity of this transporter gene to, let me get this right, downregulate serotonin. If you think about serotonin, it's a neurotransmitter that's associated with feeling good, right? A mood, a good mood, and being happy, and that sort of thing. It has other functions as well, but that's what it's mostly known for. And so this transporter gene actually downregulates or decreases the production of serotonin, and is consequently then linked to behavioral challenges down the road for these individuals. And this actually could be a link to better understanding the psychopathology of these former premature people and their vulnerability for anxiety and depression. So just really, really fascinating stuff. And I mentioned Fumagalli, part of their group, they did a longitudinal study on the cohort of very preterm infants, and they looked at the SLC6A4 gene, and they also did some functional MRIs looking at brain volumes. So they were really kind of looking at different domains, and then they looked at the performance, these babies, children's performance on this. It's called the Griffith Mental Developmental Scales, specifically the personal social scale. And that there was a correlation with these premature people that had, and they did a control group, but the premature people, the higher their, the methylation, the more compromised their brain volumes were, subcortical regions in the brain. Specifically, they actually identify the anterior temporal lobes, and they had suboptimal performance on their personal social scales. So what I'm basically trying to tell you is people are doing brilliant research that really can inform us across many different domains, that then, kind of, validates and strengthens the urgency for us, right? To really take this information and go, okay, what are we going to do differently, right? And I want you to feel encouraged to, check out these resources, read the papers, get into a journal club with your team and say, okay, let's look at this, and then how can we take this information and change how we provide care across all of these different areas, and I'll talk about that shortly, to reduce this toxic stress that they're exposed to, which will hopefully then reduce their vulnerability to DNA methylation. So let's see, what else can I share with you? I mean, Prevenzi also in 2019 followed a cohort of these very preterm infants over a period of 6 years, collected blood samples to monitor the level of the methylation of the SLC6A4 gene. Let's see, over their hospital period, and then again at 4.5 years of age. And this was when they were looking at pain. So pain-related stress was absolutely linked to increased levels of DNA methylation of the serotonin transporter gene. That was the brilliant paper. And again, we know this, right? And I mean, I have a two-sided feeling about this. Like, I think it's important that we continue to collect research, but how much research do we really need? Keep doing it, it's important. before we're going to change practice, right? Before we're really going to commit to consistently and reliably managing the pain and the pain-related stress for every single procedure, for every single action. I mean, we've got research that talks about the stress that individuals endure as a consequence of a diaper change or a nappy change. And yet we fail to support these individuals during these stressful experiences because we minimize it. And then, you know, I'm going to get off on a tangent after I do this book series and really kind of talk about how we view these individuals as fellow human beings. And is that really what's is that part of this barrier that we are coming up against that is impeding our capacity to fully support the trauma that they're experiencing during their hospital stay consistently and reliably? And I know that it's multifactorial, and I'm going to invite you to, you know, engage in a dialogue with me as we continue to do this series. And I start to get a little bit more courageous and pull over the whiteboard and really start diving into this information with you guys. Okay. So we know additionally through other researchers that, let's see, similar to findings related to methylation of SLC6A4, there's a higher mean DNA methylation of another gene, NR3C1, which was significantly associated with compromised socio-emotional development at 6 and 18 months of age. And that was a study by Folger et al. So we're seeing these links. So what we need to do, and I know the Provenzi and Monterosi team is looking at, now that they've kind of identified these epigenetic markers, is now looking at the impact of these trauma-informed developmentally supported care practices and how it hopefully will create like a buffer, you know, that it may actually reduce or mitigate the intensity of the methylation that these individuals are experiencing. So stay tuned. Hopefully that will be happening and we'll be seeing more information. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to also just present some additional really interesting information. This one paper, this is a 2018 paper, but I don't know how I missed it, but this was talking about intrauterine inflammation, epigenetics, and microbiome influences on preterm infant health. So as just kind of connected dots from yesterday's lecture, or the lecture that I presented on about the neuroendocrine immune network, that process is mediated by a stress response that then activates inflammation. And that this inflammation actually becomes chronic in the setting of prolonged early life adversity, i.e. being in the NICU or PICU or CICU as a vulnerable individual, sets up that chronic inflammation. That's also a contributing factor. That's part of the environment, right? There's macro environment, there's micro environmental influences that impact this individual. Because in the NEC paper, you know, and I think about micro environmental influences, they talk about how hypoxia is also an environmental stressor that can induce DNA methylation in this one particular, gee willikers, am I going to be able to find it? One particular, oh yeah, TLR4. And again, it's not necessary that you know these different genes, because obviously I don't have them memorized, but just that they're finding more and more of these genes that are susceptible to methylation as a consequence of their exposure to environmental stressors. So, you know, I think there's a lot of information here. And this other paper that I'm talking about now with the NEC, this is 2021, March 2021. It's in Frontiers in Pediatrics. And the brilliant group of researchers out of the Netherlands, they talk about DNA methylation of 1, 2, 3 different genes is associated with necrotizing enterocolitis. And the thing that was interesting from these guys is they actually, in addition to highlighting this connection, also demonstrated the use of human DNA extraction from stool samples. So, you know, again, if you're, you know, itching to do some research about this, that's a vehicle that's non-invasive and readily, usually accessible for us to continue to do the evaluation and understand how all of this trauma, macro trauma, micro trauma, cellular trauma, is influencing the developmental trajectory, the physiologic and psycho-emotional health and well-being of these individuals. And I think I think it's in the science chapter. It is in the science chapter, but I don't know if I mentioned it when I talked about the NEI, the Neuroendocrine Immune Network. But in the world of trauma, people usually use this reference of the tree, the trauma tree. And if you think about a tree, right, you think about its roots, under the earth, looking for nourishment. And then you've got the trunk of the tree, and then you've got the branches, and then you've got the leaves, okay? If you use that image as an exemplar of the impact of trauma, and again, there's no competition here, okay? Trauma is trauma, and there's no judgment on whose trauma is worse than another person's trauma, because trauma is horrific. But as far as the pervasive nature of it from a developmental perspective, the earlier in life that an individual is exposed to trauma, so think about these premature individuals or newborns, right? They're at that roots level. If you think about the tree, right? They're at the level of the roots, or that transition period from where the roots, kind of bring up a sprout. And so once a traumatic situation impacts that developing tree, the rest of the development of the tree is impacted then, right? Is it going to grow straight? Is it going to grow to its full breadth and width? Is it going to be able to bear fruit? What's going to happen to it? And that's, why I get so super passionate about this topic with regard to these premature people and these newborn people, right? Critically ill babies that are exposed to early life adversity, because again, it's such a vulnerable period on their developmental trajectory. It will derail the rest of their health and wellness. And we really need to understand that. I also just came across this really interesting paper, and this is a brilliant researcher out of the University of Rhode Island, Mary Sullivan, and she's looking at allostatic load, right? Remember that word when I talked about NEI, allostasis is stress, a fancy word for stress. So allostatic load, the stress load, and epigenetic mechanisms in life course trajectories of premature infants at age 30. This is the first study of its kind. And when I get down to the bottom here, she talks about how they will explore epigenome-wide DNA methylation as a mechanism underlying allostatic load processes. Both allostatic load and DNA methylation build on a stress paradigm theorized at the developmental origins theory of health and disease. And I remember reading those papers, gee willikers, probably 10 years ago, the fetal and neonatal origins of adult disease. And now we're really seeing the biology, cellular biology, the genomic biology, the microbiome biology that influences the developmental trajectory of these individuals, physiologically, psychologically, socio-emotionally, and beyond. So I think, having an understanding of this, I want to encourage you, dive into it, do a PubMed search, get your nerd on. It's fascinating information. And I think, again, the more we know, right, this is the cool thing about knowledge, right? I know people say knowledge is power. But I also read some other person, and I feel bad, I can't remember who it was, but they said knowledge is really potential power. Because unless you do something with the knowledge, who cares, right? And so I want you to, curate the knowledge within yourself. I'm encouraging you to do this research and then translate that potential power into action, into transformation. Join our movement, become trauma-informed, become a certified trauma-informed professional, and help us do this at the global level. Okay, well, let me, bring it down a few notches and everything. And thank you very much for your participation. On Monday, I'll wrap up Chapter 4's science topics when I talk about the energy costs of traumatic stress in the NICU. And this is when we get really nerdy and we talk about mitochondria, we talk about ATP, and we talk about the influence of this energy substrate and the positive energy that these individuals have available to us and where that energy may be leaking to. So thank you so very much. I hope you're enjoying this series. Please share your comments below. Have a wonderful weekend and take care and care well. Bye.